Welcome to the STARS program, seniors taking active roles in society. And now, here's your host, ANITA FINLEY.
We have Darwin Porter, who is our great author, calling in from Staten Island. So let's get started right now. We're going to talk to Darwin. Good morning, Darwin.
Good morning to you. I say in my snowy voice from the Arctic North.
Right, Mr. Eskimo. I know I've been watching the New York weather. It's just been atrocious.
Oh, my. Thank God I used to cover Greenland and North Finland for Frommer.
Did you really? Oh, my. So did it say, though, that the Arctic air and the vortex is much worse than it's ever been?
Yes, particularly in Chicago. But, well, of course, Chicago in the winter has never been my favorite place. Anita, the world is changing so fast that I could hardly keep up with it. But I have something that I want to talk about that's happening to so many people who are baby boomers or even wartime babies, and I want to relate my personal experience on the subject. And one is, so many of us trained and practiced professions that are disappearing.
For example, what?
Well, the milkman.
The milkman, okay.
I mean, you saw those old movies where Frank Sinatra came home with a beautiful hot babe, had been out all night, and the milkman was delivering a quart of milk on the stoop. And today, if you did that, someone would grab that bottle and drink it. But anyway.
Well, wait. But I remember when the milk was delivered and I used to get the cream on the top.
Oh, yes. But what is so interesting, and to me, is as Scott Fitzgerald said, there are no second acts in American life. Well, Ronald Reagan certainly proved that Mr. Fitzgerald was wrong about that. And I've had my own development, but I wanted to tell you about how I got involved. And, of course, it ultimately involved Paramount Pictures, how I got involved in a profession that rose to the top and then faded. And that was the Frommer travel guides. Now, a profession like I had would not exist anymore. But Frommer, there was almost the travel book industry. There was Bedecker, some dull thing, but Frommer was a visionary. Unfortunately, he didn't carry through with it because he got sidetracked by his hotels. But he created the idea that Americans were starting to travel. The baby boomers were growing up and finishing school, and many of them wanted to go to Europe. And he came up with the idea of putting hotels, restaurants, sightseeing, nightlife and shopping and travel tips and transportation tips all in one book, which was hard as hell to do, but he made it, this was a revolutionary idea at the time. And I happened to come along. I was a newspaper man on the Miami Herald, and I found it very tempted to profession. Well, it just rose and rose, and these books started to really sell. And I think my heyday came in 1967 when I was walking on the Plaza Mayor, which is the center of Madrid, the oldest square. And I think I saw every fourth person carrying my book on Spain.
Really?
And then within a few years, I went into a bookstore, and there were about 30 other books on Spain because sometimes the competition say, oh my God, let's get into the travel book business. And then the competition, really started to go. But then what happened? One day I found out that Frommer sold us out. And my new boss was Paramount Pictures. Now, Paramount Pictures today is on life support, but I had gone as a little boy. Paramount Pictures I saw nearly all their movies, Bing Crosby, Betty Grable, Bob Hope. I just never wanted to miss a Paramount picture. I never realized I would spend most of my life working for Paramount. I may never have told you this, but Paramount owned the Frommer Guides.
No, and you never told me that.
Yeah, and then they knew then how to make it an empire. So it was very interesting to get in on something that was just starting to build. And of course, I saw it through to the near end. But I'll give you an example of how they thought. I had a book called Caribbean, including Bermuda and the Bahamas. So I was called in and they said, "You do think small, don't you?" Well, I said, "It's a pretty big book." And they said, "Well, maybe it's too big. We want to keep the Caribbean book, but we have other plans. Do a separate book on Bermuda and do a separate book on the Bahamas. And what about a book on Caribbean cruises? And then while you do that, what about a book called Caribbean Ports of Call? Because people will get off those cruise ships and want to know where to go. And also they have all these cut rate prices in the Caribbean on the summers. So why don't you do a Caribbean bargain book? Now, some people will go just to Puerto Rico. So do a book on Puerto Rico. And same thing for Jamaica. And while you're at it, do a book on Barbados and the Cayman Islands. I said, this seems ironic. When I first went to the Cayman Islands, I was doing a story for the Miami Herald. And they said, "We don't want your tourists from Florida to come over here." Well, I don't know if you've been to the Cayman Islands, but
yes, I have.
Yeah. Well, believe it or not, they said they didn't want tourists back then. Well, they changed, and you wouldn't believe it. It went on. They wanted a book on St. Martin, Aruba, and Turks and Caicos. Now, when I first went to Turks and Caicos, do you know it was at the bottom of the list of the most unrecognizable country name in the world? And then all of a sudden, all these tourist developments came up and it became a tourist destination. And they wanted a portable book on the Bahamas. And then I couldn't believe it. They wanted me to do a book called Bahamas for Dummies.
You're kidding. Oh, no, that's funny.
No, it was all part. I didn't realize I signed the contract to do spinoffs. But then they started taking my other books and doing spinoffs, like a book on England. Well, then do a book on London, do a book on Scotland. And I suddenly found myself, I was dealing with a small publisher, and these Paramount people, my God, at my very peak, the territory ranged from Greenland to the Sahara Desert. Of course, that would mean a stopover in New York for a change of wardrobe. But it was just like a factory. It was the great heyday of travel. It's all very, very different now. And do you know, I stuck in there until 2013, but then the internet came along. Now, travel books today, Frommer's daughter is still sort of carrying on, but I dropped into a few bookstores, which we used to have our books all over the place, and they're hardly there anymore. I didn't even see them really. But they do exist in some small style. So my profession as a travel writer, they wouldn't have a job like that today.
Well, let me stop you because I have to ask you a question. I don't know how you possibly could have gone to each place, found, because I've seen some of your things, you showed them before, and found all this information and was able to write it up. And that must have put you on a whirlwind tour, but over and over and over again.
Yes, it was, because, for example, the country of Germany, well, actually, when I started, it was called West Germany. And there were still lots of ruins still left over from World War II. So you could imagine what had changed that. And, of course, Germany, they wanted spin-offs, Munich, the Bavarian Alps, Berlin. And I had so much going that it was just a whirlwind life, and it went on for decades. But I must say, they paid very well. And then one day I got the terrible news that we had been sold to John Wiley. Well, first, Wiley's a very old publishing house. They used to publish Charles Dickens, and that dates them. Well, first they started cutting all salaries in half, which is not a good way to entice your employees. And guess what? As they did that, the cost of travel in Europe and the world increased. You know, originally when I did Spain, I had a hard time spending $1,000, and then Madrid became $1,000 a day. So I'm just saying this so much because in my lifetime I've seen such a change. Then I regretted losing my boss of decades, Paramount Pictures. I mean, when I took over, it was run by a very dynamic, unbelievable man. He's still alive, named Robert Evans. He tried to be an actor. He played a bullfighter in The Sun Also Rises with Ava Gardner, and then Errol Flynn and Jerome Powell were in it on their last legs. Both of them were soon dead, and he didn't quite make it as an actor, but and then he went back to New York, and he made a lot of money selling jock straps. And this was before he took over Paramount. Now, he had jock straps in very small size, in jumbo size, and all sizes in between. And he came up with the idea, you know, jock straps back then were white. So he made them chartreuse, sunflower yellow, lavender. And he even came up with a sequin jock straps, they were used mostly by male strippers. And he also branched in women's wear. Now, somehow he went from the jock strap to the head of Paramount, and he hit it during its heyday. I mean, he made, I don't know, you probably saw it, called Love Story with Ali McGraw and Ryan O'Neal.
Oh, I did.
In fact, Robert married Ali McGraw, among 7 or 8 other wives and tons of girlfriends. And so he was our boss. And Paramount had given up doing crime films. And finally, Robert forced them to do The Godfather. And the rest is history. And then he had one hit after another. Of course, his heyday came and went. But at that time, he took us over. It was like a glory ride. I mean, all these things were happening, and there was plenty of money to do all these projects and everything. And so it was a thrilling ride. And I never meant to spend most of my life writing travel books because my goal had always been to do Hollywood biographies. That's what I was really researching and training. And so, of course, I used my time traveling all over the world to be at certain locations where movies were being made. A famous example was in Rome, where they were making Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor, who was falling in love with Richard Burton. It was always so. I was also gathering information for my second act, and which is highly recommended for baby boomers, I think, who saw their professions go by the wayside or develop the new technology. And it's interesting how we, I think I knew so many newspaper people who weren't really, there were 12 newspapers in New York when I came here, including some of my favorites like Journal American. You may remember the newspaper columnist Dorothy Kilgallen.
Oh, I do.
The last person she interviewed was Jack Ruby, who shot Lee Harvey Oswald.
Really?
As people think she was murdered because she knew too much. And the Herald Tribune. I used to read them all, even the Brooklyn Eagle. And I always wondered what all those newspaper people did when they left New York. and now basically the USA Today is the #1 paper in America. The New York Times is now #3.
Is that right? Who's #2? The Washington Post?
The Wall Street Journal. It has about 2.5 million readers.
But the USA Today is #1, and it's probably because every hotel and motel you go in, they give it away free when you arrive.
Well, it was 2.1 million, and the New York Times is about 1. They have about 1 million more readers than they. I mean, Mr. Trump always talks about the failed New York Times. They are having trouble, but we don't. You know, for me and for baby boomers, I think we will always read newspapers. You know, I don't like to get my news on the web, but the internet basically killed the travel industry.
Well, I know, and also the internet hurt magazines. I mean, I used to have a lot more advertising, and now we have built up our internet, but it's not the same. Not for our target market. Our target market are like we are, readers.
Yeah, yes, but I guess what I'm saying is, if you live a certain number of years on this planet, I mean, we have seen incredible changes in this century that we were born into and that faded into the 21st century. And I never thought I would quite see the world that I'm seeing today. I find a lot of things going now almost unbelievable. I was in Madison Avenue advertising, and I don't know if I ever told you that was very restricted back in those days. We nearly got fired because we hired Lena Horne to do a commercial, and they couldn't even show it in the South.
Really?
I tell people those stories, and I told a young man that, and he said, no, African Americans have been in advertising like they always were. I said, you know, what year were you born? He said 1997. I said, there was a lot going on before 1997, kid.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And I think the casting of African American actors in commercials now, I assume they show them in New York. I mean, they're in almost every one of them.
Yeah, yeah.
And I nearly got fired for Miss Lena Horne, who, by the way, is a wonderful, talented woman. And so we've had to go through so many changes, and now it seems almost dazzling to try to keep up. I used to try to review movies, and I was sort of on top of it, and then I just found out that Netflix is on the verge of releasing 90 movies.
Amazing. Just amazing.
And my dear old Paramount is, as they just said recently in the press, is on life support. It's just had terrible losses, and it may have 10 movies coming out. And executives said, we're counting on the themes of drugs, gay sex, and rock and roll.
No kidding.
And, for example, May is the most competitive month to release a movie. So we're releasing Elton John. I guess that's where the gay sex comes in. And in September, their big thing is Gemini Man with Will Smith, where he plays an aging con man who has to go after his younger clone of himself who's threatening to kill him. And they're having to make movies now. 70% of the business of movie making is abroad. And so only 30% of movie revenue comes in. Not only that, in the last year, there were only 10 feature films made in Hollywood. Georgia has become a big filmmaking. And see, Georgia and New Mexico, they offer all these subsidies to get film people. And Staten Island used to be a film center before they moved to Hollywood, and they moved 3 studios back to Staten Island now. So I can't believe only 10 feature films made in Hollywood.
So what do you think this all says to us? You know, listening to you and seeing how there's so many changes, but, you know, people seem to get other ideas. I mean, it's been amazing, the entrepreneurship.
Oh, it has. It's been incredible. Well, look at the creation of Facebook and all those. So a lot, but the trouble that I am finding is so many people of my age are having a bit of a time trying to adjust to even how to work all of these new equipment that we're faced with. You know, I see these little 8-year-olds punching all these buttons on computers and all this stuff, and they always seem to be communicating with someone. Many of them have lost the power of communicating to someone in person, though. That's one thing that I'm finding, that a lot of the young people, and I meet quite a few of them now, they don't seem to have a great power of communication with other people, but they're communicating with somebody.
Well, but you have, you know, you have a lot of new things coming on, and I think even thinking about you and Danforth, here you have this fabulous home, and you now have it as an Airbnb, and that is only possible in a sense because you are stunning in what your life has been, and when people want to go stay at a place, they want to be surrounded by people like you. So you have figured out a way to keep going on in a different vein.
Oh, yes. And basically, that really is almost a point I really want to make, which is about moving on to your next role in life, which is something that you may have had. You may have had a marital situation. You've lost the love of your life, and so it's that second phase we have to go, or in many cases the third phase. So I think getting older has awful disadvantage. Betty Davis said, "Getting old is not for sissies," and it's not. You have to be strong. You have to carry on, and yet I'm finding an enrichment because I have more plans and more things going on. And I've got 50 books I could do right now.
Oh my heavens! Well, what one are you working on now?
Well, I'm 3 days from finishing the first biography ever written of Kirk Douglas.
Oh, that's right. You've been working on Kirk Douglas. Oh,
well,
yes.
I had to take time out to do 2 other books, but
by the way, I got that book that you sent me. It is just so wonderful, and you were so kind. I mean, I couldn't have believed what you wrote about me, but the book itself is wonderful how you put that together. And how are you marketing that?
Well, there's another one will be out in June on a very different subject.
Okay.
So you'll be in that too.
Oh, you are just amazing.
So yes, that's another branch. I mean, we're starting to do. I have tons of we have to go, I think. I'll tell you more about that later. But I hope you understood what I was trying to say. I enjoyed the peak and the glories of one part of life, one profession that has come and gone, and then immediately hurl myself into another. And they both have enrichments in different ways. And I think it's made me a better person. It certainly made me able to cope with so many things that I couldn't have coped with before, because you could imagine like traveling the world for 50 years.
Yes, I know. Just, well, you're very special, Darwin, and I can't tell you how thrilled I am that I count you as one of my dearest, most wonderful friends and colleagues, and I thank you so much, and we welcome all your calls every, Saturday mornings, once a month, Elise, in your column, and Thank you, and just keep staying well. Don't go out in that weather.
Yes, exactly. But listen, your show this morning sounds terrific. Good luck with it.
Okay, we'll talk soon. All right, bye.